Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Fundamentals of Things. This is Chapter 1, Lesson 3. My name is Cole.
And I'm here again. My name is Sean.
And today we're going to be covering nebulae. Here are some pictures of some nebulae you may have seen before out in outer space or with a telescope or maybe just on the internet. That's where we found these, the internet. So let's get right into it.
Just to quickly explain what nebulae these specifically are, the one in the background is what's called a bow tie nebula, and the one in the foreground is an hourglass nebula. So,
right, an empty hourglass, it would appear. So, what is a nebula? Basically, a nebula is a collection of things, and a collection of things can often be referred to as one thing in order to save time or simplify life's structures, and this one thing is called a nebula.
Now, a nebula is not just a collection of things. It is actually a swirling collection of things that can be found in outer space. These things, which I'm just using to refer to collection of things, are typically small on their own, like dust, but together make up a swirling demonic mess.
And a nebula is the beginnings of a star, so that is why you're finding this chapter in this lesson in Chapter 1, Beginnings. And stars are really our only chance of visualizing and thus thinking about huge animals at night. That's what astrology is. And they're also the reason that these sunglasses were invented.
Yes, I was just reviewing the chapter that we will do eventually on sunglasses last night, actually. And let me just say, I'm excited for that chapter.
Oh, me too. That is an interesting one. Let's just go into a little aside here. Why do things cluster and bunch? Well, because if they didn't, then there'd be a whole lot of things taking up absolutely no space at all.
That's correct, Cole. And the fact that things might not necessarily take up any space at all isn't actually a bad thing in of itself. It would actually make for a much more peaceful universe, because there would be, just to name a few things here, there'd be no honking car horns or supermodels.
Right. But it would lead to too many holes in space, or places where there isn't a single thing or thought.
And too many holes would be an absolute recipe for disaster, because stuff would start to seep through these holes from, well, let's just say the other side, and our world would start to get filled with an anhydrous glitter.
That's most of what the other side is composed of, anyway. So, how does a nebula form a star? Step 1, first a nebula must decide to form a star. Most things have responsibilities, but a nebula might have the most important responsibility of all.
Right, so step 2, after deciding so, nebulae then must gather themselves and become a true nebula. Beforehand, they weren't a nebula. They were nothing but a scattering of space things in, well, space.
Next, these things begin to swirl and zoom towards a central point in space called the president of a nebula. You can compare this to the president of the United States, who is the single person in the country around whom everyone is swirling and zooming towards. So there's a good analogy if you're in need of one of those. And this is not to be confused with the president of a nation, of course.
Now, the final step, which actually occurs probably 2 to 3 trillion years after the first step occurred, is that when too many space things get too close to this swirling and eager president, for the president to continue existing there, the president and all of the space things swirling around it cease to exist, and a star enters our world in its place, again from the other side.
This is one of the rare cases when something entering our space from the other side is not glitter. So let's move on. Here's a diagram of a nebula right before it forms.
Cole, you want to just go through click the next button so that we can get the picture up here?
Oh no, that is the picture. I mean, this is the diagram.
So
here are a few brief jokes about the nebula, and a little note. Typically, a lecture like this is not really a place for jokes, but the ecstatic and ethereal feeling one gets when thinking of the beginning of the universe must go somewhere. So, how about you start us off with a good one, Sean?
Sure, why not? Where does the nebula go shopping? Answer: the butcher and the deli. The butcher and the deli are both different kinds of nebula.
Next up, what does a nebula do to get ready for work? This one doesn't appear to have a punchline, unfortunately. Take it away, Sean.
How did the nebula sun grow to become so tall? Well, he grew from atoms and molecules until his nebula teacher, which I'm guessing is also his nebula father, said, "Hey, get down from there."
And finally, will there ever be a last nebula? No one can know for sure because no one even knows what a nebula is for sure. But this is something to think about. Not really a joke, but more of a brain twister for you. So why are nebulae important? Well, nebulae are the reason we are here.
And it's important to grasp what a nebula is, because we too are, in a sense, nebulae, and from a nebula too.
And as mentioned a few slides ago, nebulae have the most important decision in the universe. A nebula has never decided against making a star. If it did, that would be a disaster.
Now, just to follow up on that, this is not to say that it is impossible or out of the question for a nebula, or nebula for that matter, to decide against making a star. It is just that by the process of induction, we may deduce, inductively, that this will never, ever be the case. And finally, scientists have not yet identified the place where the president goes when a star is formed. Remember that the president disappears, and in its place, a star appears. And so the answer to where the president actually goes, scientists have surmised, probably has a very strong connection with God, who he or it is, and the afterlife, if not just more science.
Right, and you might think that since, a nebula forms, it comes to us from the other side, that's where the president goes. I'm sorry, when a star forms, it comes to us from the other side, that's where the president and the nebula go. But that has been proven to not be the case. The president and the nebula are going somewhere entirely different that we have yet to find out.
I was just reading this paper the other day about the possibility of an other side. And
so kind of the reverse side of the other side.
That's what I'm saying. I sat there laughing for about 15 minutes and then just tore the paper to shreds.
Well, yeah, and rightly so. Anyways, that wraps it up for Chapter 1, Lesson 3. Hope you had fun learning a little bit about the nebula and what it's all about. So we'll pick it up next week with Lesson 4, logically. And just stay safe out there, everyone.